great things about globalization is by having a single military superpower, the entire world was combined into a single economic zone. And the efficiencies and the economies of scale that we got from that are something that we've never had before in human history. So, if you want to make this an American example, imagine what your economy would be like in your local state if you couldn't trade with the other 49 states. So, Texas has all the energy that it needs, but it's not going to have the iron ore. Minnesota is going to have the iron ore, but it's not going to have electricity. Iowa is going to have the corn and the pigs, but it's not going to have access to a road network or a rail network. Now, play that across the entire planet. We've had a single unified economic space, more or less. And in the case of energy, that means that energy that is produced in Saudi Arabia can go anywhere in the world, or the Germans can import energy from anywhere in the world. And as long as we've been locked together in this single system, everyone has a vested interest in making sure there are no disruptions to the transport system. Because if you have an interruption, say, in the Strait of Malacca, people in Vancouver are going to feel the energy pressure from that. What the price cap that the Europeans are putting on the Russians is doing is hiving the Russians off from the global pricing and energy security system, and then breaking the Russian system into two pieces, one that trades west into the European space and one that trades east into the Asian space. Well, if that's the case, then countries are able to choose what they want, but they're going to become locked into some of those choices. So China's probably the best example here. They're going to have a very heavy exposure to that Asian flow, which means that other countries have a vested interest, or let me rephrase that, other countries no longer are going to be upset if something happens to that flow because it doesn't influence them. It's not part of their economies of a scale. It's a sequestered energy source on a very focused transport route going to a sequestered energy consumer. And if any part of that process breaks, it doesn't affect Ecuador.
Okay, an Asian flow.
The last time this happened, where we had pricing and security relationships for energy flows separated, countries had a vested interest in interrupting the supplies of their rivals. And that was one of the many factors that led to the world wars. Now, I don't think we're going to see a World War III because no one has the capacity to operate in different theaters except for the United States, and we don't have the interest. But we can still easily have the economic outcomes of a major conflict in a series of regional fights as countries are discovering that they're going to have to take matters into their own hands in terms of their security and economic wherewithal. And in a world where demographics have already collapsed and the Americans have kind of checked out in terms of patrolling the seas, that means a lot of countries have a very long way to fall. If we were at war, the Russians wouldn't have power right now. So no, we are certainly involved. There are no American boots on the grounds in any sort of combat operation. This is not something like we were doing in the Iraq War, where we had special forces enmeshed with the Peshmerga, helping with the technologies. Almost all the weapons assistance is being done virtually. Thank God for Starlink. So we definitely have our fingers in the pot, but just the fingers, no boots on the ground, and that makes a really big difference. If the United States was treating this like a real war and our military assets were activated, there would not be a single Russian vessel that was not on the seabed already, and every Russian economic and military asset within 500 miles of any coastline would already be in ruins. So anyone who thinks that the United States is all in on this has not been paying attention to U.S. military capability. We might suck at nation building, but if it comes to turning things into craters, we are very good at that. I anticipate we're going to be seeing sort of an American friends and family program evolving. NAFTA is obviously the core of that, and the hard work for that is not only done, but one of the great achievements of the Trump administration, from my point of view, from a cultural point of view, is convincing the hard right that tends to be very anti-migrant that Mexico is part of the family. I think that is the most indelible long-term impact of the Trump administration that we should be happy about. Other countries are going to be invited or already have found a way in the door. So the Australians and the Colombians already have long-term trade deals with the United States that are only going to get stronger. And Japan is a country that realized what was going on, realized that the Americans were backing away from sponsoring the global economy, realized the American military was going to be less adventurous in the future. And they looked around and they realized that they have the world's oldest demographic structure already. They've been dealing with this for 30 years. And they really didn't want to be facing the Russians in Asia and the Chinese by themselves. So they went to the White House and basically sought terms, and Trump's terms were humiliating, to put it in a single word. They signed anyway. And then when Biden came in, the Japanese made it very clear they did not want to amend the terms. So the Japanese have successfully bought their way into the American inner circle. So they're going to come along for the ride. Whether or not the Brits join is up to them. They have to really figure out what Brexit means. I mean, it's been 6 years. It should be time already, but they're just not there yet. The Europeans have a lot less wiggle room on their demographics because they have a lot less land area per unit of population. They just have not been able to maintain a high birth rate because they don't have something that we would consider the suburbs. You pretty much have a relatively dense urban core, and then you've got the farms, and there's very little buffer zone in between where an up-and-coming family can raise kids and have a yard. And if everyone's living in a condo, your birth rate's going to be lower. Also, they started industrializing decades before the rest of the world. So they're just so much further along in this process. And a lot of what we would consider your traditional Western European countries, Italy, Germany, Belgium, their demographics turned terminal back in the 80s. There just weren't enough kids to carry it forward. Well, and if you fast forward that 40 years, it means that they're literally running out of 40-year-olds. So this is the decade that all of those countries age into mass obsolescence. And we really don't have an economic model that can allow national cohesion. And then there's another crop of European countries, the bulk of the Central Europeans, all the way from Estonia to Bulgaria, that actually have faster aging demographies, but from a slightly younger base, and they will follow in the decade to come. We're looking at a Europe in as soon as 2040 that is made up of really just Spain, the United Kingdom, France, and the Scandinavian countries. The rest of it will have aged into desolation. It certainly limits your options. I'd argue that the way you see it is probably broadly accurate. In the United States, when we talk about demography, we usually do mean it as a marketing scheme. You know, that you've got a number of people who are in this specific demographic group. They value these things. They're at this stage of their life. Therefore, these products make sense to them. And the group that we've constantly been talking about are the millennials and especially the baby boomers. But there's more to it than just what it means from a market point of view in the short term, because if you to play the long term, I mean, the problem with demographics is that they're glacial. It takes a lifetime for someone to live a life. And we've known since the 60s that the baby boomers eventually were going to age into retirement, and that was going to change the system because instead of paying taxes, they're going to be drawing pensions. Well, on average, that happens in the fourth quarter of calendar year 2022. We're here. We've known this has been coming for 40 years, but no one's ready because it was always off in the future. Well, the baby boomers are not just an American population block. They exist in every advanced country. The difference between the American boomers and everyone else is that American boomers actually had children that we now know as the millennials. Now, we can talk trash about the millennials all day, and I really do enjoy doing that, but they've got something going for them that all of their cohorts around the world don't. They exist. And so we have a 10 to 20 year period of financial crunch as the boomer money goes away before the millennials are in their 50s and providing capital. And we've got that's like a 10-year break in the financial world. And we've got a 20-year break while we're waiting for the millennials' kids to grow up. But if you look at the demographic structure of, say, Germany or Italy or Korea, they've got more people in their 60s than their 50s than their 40s than their 30s than their 20s than their teens than children. There's no coming back from this. So we are literally living in the last handful of years for a number of major ethnicities and economies that have been globally significant for decades, if not centuries. And it all ends in the first half of this century, with most of it being front-loaded this decade.
Russ?
I would say nobody. The French do, the Swedes do, and the New Zealanders do. And that's it.
And that's it.
So, you know, the French can do the catering, and the Kiwis can man the bar, and the Swedes can be the bouncers, but a global economy, that is not. I think so. I mean, all in their own way. The Kiwis like to pretend that they're neutral, but when anything is really important, they're not. And with the Australians, their largest trading partner, joining us, they're probably going to come along, especially since their second largest trading partner, China, is going to implode. So I have no doubt that the Kiwis